Well, this is Mental Health Radio, take it from us, and I've been did do quite a bit of research 2 or 3 weeks ago on patient assaults on staff and mental health units, and I stumbled on a paper published by news agency The Spin-Off. It highlights the common use of illegal video surveillance of mental health patients by many DHBs throughout the country in acute mental health units. It raises many questions. How widely is this dangerous and illegal surveillance known in psychiatry? What, if any, consent is sought from patients? How regularly is this surveillance viewed by staff, and who has the okay to view it? And many other questions that we're going to ask our guest today. The revelations from this review of illegal surveillance was done by Karyn Black, a guest writer for media outlet The Spin-Off. And its findings are more than disturbing, and I'm surprised its release some time ago hasn't caused a storm among people with lived experience and among the consumer movement. So here to talk about the review is Karyn Black. She's a former consumer advisor and now a current student advocate with Kahui to Kaha. So welcome, Karyn, to Mental Health Radio. Take it from us. It's been a little bit of a time before you get your opportunity to say anything in the studio, but welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's kind of really good, I think, that you guys have picked up on this, and I'm obviously interested in the research that I've done. So thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. So how did you come to review this issue of video surveillance or CCTV in mental health units?
So I completed the research as part of my consumer leadership role for Kahui to Kaha some time ago now. Kahui to Kaha has the contract to provide consumer leadership to Auckland District Health Board's mental health services, and so I reviewed it as part of my work.
So that's the wider ADHB mental health services, or just the acute services?
Yeah, so the consumer leadership contract is for all of mental health services within Auckland District Health Board,
right?
Catchment area, yeah.
So when did you complete this research?
So I completed it in October of 2017, but really the work that I was doing on it took about 5 or 6 months leading up to that.
So something tipped you off that there was video surveillance?
Yeah, so that sort of occurred. I'd just actually come back from maternity leave, I think, and a colleague of mine, I was having a conversation with them, and they were much more closely involved with providing leadership to Whetū Tāwara, and they were saying that they'd had a number of concerns regarding security and safety for staff and patients and people who visit the service. So they wanted to try and look at ways that they could improve this, and CCTV was one of the ideas that was being floated at the time. As
something that would be mutually beneficial to both patients and staff, or or was there a focus on staff safety?
I think those things are both equally as important, and that would have been the focus that they were coming from. I mean, there's perhaps people's things going missing, those sorts of things also of concern, property being damaged, that sort of stuff too.
Any more serious issues though, like perhaps drugs being taken into hospital?
Yeah, I think that was a concern of the as well.
Right. So how did you go about identifying information, researching?
That's quite a good question, because it sort of just unfolded quite organically for me, I suppose. I was interested in 3 main areas. Firstly, I wanted to find out what other DHBs are using in terms of their CCTV usage, and then also secondary to that, I was interested in what patients and staff and family members thought about having CCTV operating in patient units. And so that component of it took, I sent out a survey to different consumer networks for different staff as well, to try and receive feedback kind of for what staff thought. And finally, I also completed a literature review looking at international examples where CCTV is used in inpatient units, and looking at the findings of that. So there were really 3 components of it. It was an audit of what other DHBs are using in terms of their CCTV the survey and the literature review.
How did you get access to staff?
In terms of the survey, just different networks that I was involved in. I spread it among different groups, asking for people to complete it.
And did they do that anonymously?
Yeah, it was all anonymously. It was just done through a SurveyMonkey, I think, which is an anonymous online survey platform.
Right. And did you go as far as extracting information out of the Official Information Act? Or?
Oh, yeah, so that was a channel that I used to get the information from the CCTV usage component of it. So I completed official information requests to all of the DHBs that had adult inpatient units operating in their area, and asked for them to provide data on the usage, the location of where the cameras were, and their justification or their reason behind including the cameras.
Right. What was your personal reaction to this when you first heard? I mean, when I first read this report, I was quite stunned. I mean, it was a shock to me to learn that the privacy of staff and patients may be being infringed. What was your personal sort of response?
Yeah, and I suppose it's really tricky because I took quite a strong personal response to this. Like, it's quite clear in the spin-off article that I don't agree with CCTV being used in inpatient units, full stop. I think it comes across quite strongly. But the research that I actually tried to do, I wanted to be as unbiased and just sort of take what is the international literature saying? Is there any efficacy for using CCTV cameras? What does that look like, and where can it be useful, and what are limitations to that? So I really wanted to pull together all the information possible in an unbiased sense, I suppose.
So were people willingly, voluntarily, obviously voluntarily, but willingly giving you information about this subject?
In terms of the OIA process, I think that's one area that I found to be incredibly difficult. Some of the DHBs were open and shared that information very readily with me, whereas others, they just didn't want to share that at all, and that drew the process out quite a lot longer. They said perhaps it would jeopardise the safety of staff and patients if they disclosed that information, and that was the reason for withholding it. And I had to challenge that and saying, well, why are the DHBs sharing this information and you're not? What's the problem here? And so, that was one of the challenges, I suppose.
So those that didn't initially want to cooperate, I mean, what did you think about their attitude, that they were wanting to keep this secret?
Yeah, obviously when someone's not willing to share information, you become sceptical around its usage. And I think that's even one of the questions I have, and the responses that I did finally get from those DHBs in particular. I can sort of see gaps when I'm looking at that data, and I sort of say, maybe they're not being 100% upfront, but they're just trying to provide a response.
Right. So how did you pressure those DHBs that weren't being very willing in their responses? I mean, you just went back to them?
Yeah, I just put a complaint through the Official Information Act process and said that, I really would like this information to be disclosed. Other DHBs have shared this, and so there's really no issue for safety. And disclosing this.
So some of the findings, how extensively is CCTV used in New Zealand's acute mental health units? Yeah,
and I think the spin-off article covers that particularly well in terms of providing that table, but I think it's, from memory, 12 of the 20 adult inpatient units in New Zealand currently have CCTV operating to a certain extent. That's 12 out of, so there are 20 acute. Yeah, so I think it's roughly about 60%, but that was at the time of completing the research back in 2017. Te Aho Mai, the Counties Manukau inpatient unit, which has recently been refurbished. I'm sure, some of your listeners know. Well, rebuilt, in fact. Yeah. So it's totally a fresh unit. So since the time when I submitted the official information requests up until now, they've actually put cameras in their inpatient unit too. Right. So that number's changed.
So when you make that statement that they put cameras into the inpatient unit, I suppose that's quite a general statement. It gives maybe our listeners the feeling that the whole hospital is under surveillance or under video surveillance, but that wouldn't be the case, would it?
No, absolutely, and I think that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to come on and talk a little bit more in depth about this on the radio is, I don't want to how can you say, like fearmonger or anything like that.
Alarmist?
Alarmist kind of, I suppose, in regards to these issues, because it is something that happens, but I want to really reinforce the fact that it's something that happens to varying degrees in different hospitals. I think there are about 3 or 4 from memory that have CCTV operating in what I would define as treatment areas, which primarily includes things like lounges, corridors, and outside courtyards. So areas where in terms of common law, what's been defined as treatment is any sort of interaction with staff. So that can be staff talking with a person who's staying in an inpatient unit, to more sort of therapeutic group activities, those sorts of things. So all of that is the legal definition of treatment.
Is there any sort of evidence that these cameras maybe are not operating sort of 24/7, but when there is some sort of heightened incident that they may be turned on immediately to provide coverage of that event?
Yeah, that's a really good question. My understanding is that the CCTV is there and it's operating 24/7. But certain units don't always monitor that unless an incident occurs, and then they want to review that incident retrospectively. And so they might say, okay, on the 5th of February 2019, this occurred at this time. We want to go back and review exactly what happened. And so then they'll access that footage.
You're with Take It From Us on 104.6 Planet FM.
And I'm host Sheldon Brown with technician Declan Karyn. Did apologise to Declan for forgetting to introduce him this morning. And we're talking...
How rude.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking today to Karyn Black, who is a former consumer advisor and now student advocate with Kahui Tukaha. And we've talked a little bit about the parts of acute psychiatric units where it does operate. So, I mean, if it's in lounges, that is a place where there is, if you like, informal therapy going on, isn't there?
Yeah.
Not formal therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what is the definition of therapy? Is it sort of like a conversation with 2 people who are on the unit together? Like, that can be very therapeutic for people. Is it a conversation that happens between an orderly and a person who's also on the unit? Because that can be really helpful, and they have some really good connections to people who...
You mean the person that brings the meals in or
yeah,
brings
absolutely.
the tea in?
Yeah. Those sorts of people are often, there and available and around, and people will form connections with them and have conversations, and so that can all be therapeutic.
Yeah, well, they're often friendlier than the professional staff, in my experience.
I didn't want to go that far as saying that, but...
Well, I've said it for you. I'm host Sheldon Brown, and we're talking today to Karyn Black, who is a student advocate with Kahui Tukaha here on the Unitech site, so you didn't have too far to come today, Karyn. We're talking about what is deemed to be illegal video surveillance in psychiatric units. It's correct to say this is illegal, Karyn?
It's the advice that I've been given when I contacted legal expert Chris Gledhill, who's a law professor at AUT. I sort of pointed to him the Mental Health Act and the section, I think it's in Section 68 of the Mental Health Act, the patient rights section anyways. It sort of stipulates that no audio or visual recording of patients should be made without their consent. And so obviously this potentially can be classified as video recording, so that breaches patient rights in accordance with that legislation. So
as a result of posting some information about this on Facebook, there was some considerable response, and some people thought that there were notices up on the hospital walls and that this surveillance may have been mentioned in a sort of an information booklet. Have you seen any examples of that?
I don't one DHB, I think it was Lakes District DHB, they actually provided posters on the walls informing people that CCTV was operating. I think if people are starting to see pamphlets and wall posters on the walls, then that would perhaps be a result of the sort of audit that I did and raising this as an issue. But to me, consent isn't putting a poster on the wall or providing someone with a pamphlet. It's two separate things. And part of the work that I did was in actually looking at sort of the consent process and how fraught that would be in an inpatient environment. Because you're always going to have some people who will say, yes, fine, I'm happy to have CCTV operating. I think it's a good thing. And then you're going to have some people say, no, I don't want this here. So how do you balance the desires and the rights of both people, and how do you protect privacy in that situation?
Well, for those people who object to it, so are they then ruling out the opportunity to go to that psychiatric unit? But
then the part of the problem is people go there against their own free volition, so people are brought there under the Mental Health Act and don't have a say in whether they actually want to go there or not.
So it's a complex issue.
Yeah.
Let's just focus a little bit on the detail of where the surveillance happens within acute mental health units. What does your research reveal on that?
So what came back in terms of that was perhaps that the most common area for CCTV to be operating was in areas that would think it would be operating. So that was...
where you would think it?
Yeah, where you'd think it would be. So sort of reception areas, front entranceways where people first walk in and out of the hospital, vehicle bays. So that can be staff bringing people into the hospital, police bringing people into the hospital, those sorts of vehicle entrance in and out areas, and also medication rooms. So they were quite common places for CCTV to be operating.
Can I just stop you there in terms of medication rooms? I mean, why would it be necessary to have surveillance in a medication room?
Yeah, and I think quite a lot of medication rooms in hospitals environments probably have CCTV operating in those spaces to avoid medication errors and mishaps perhaps going on. Keeping tabs on perhaps what staff are doing with medication.
So do you think that this is a safety issue, that they, if there is an overdose and a patient might complain or have a serious side effect, they can go back and check
That's right.
how many pills are dispensed and that sort of thing?
So that would be one reason why it could be used in that space. I think the far bigger one is probably making sure that staff don't take medication for their own.
But isn't there isn't there a trust issue here? This is a reflection on the staff, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think in mental health spaces, trust is a huge issue, full stop. Those environments aren't very trusting of anyone at all.
Gosh,
Do they not do what I mean, I haven't been in the ward since 2001, but do they not go round individually and say, right, here's your medication and stay there while they take it?
Yeah, so that still occurs, but my understanding of where some of the cameras, it's hard to explain kind of over through dialogue without sort of showing, say like in this room, you have a camera in the corner and it's just purely monitoring what the staff are doing in terms of taking the medication, counting it out and then distributing it to the person. The person actually taking that medication, my understanding is that they would not come onto that, they would not be in view of the CCTV camera. So it wasn't the purpose of actually recording the person taking the medication. It was purely a staff checking.
Mine might have been just from on the ICU ward, because I think my head was with the clouds for about 5 days anyway.
But in terms of staff being videoed in a medication room, are they aware that is happening, do you think?
Yeah, I think they're definitely... I think most of the staff, or all of the staff probably working in those environments, are aware that CCTV is operating. And I've actually had sort of pharmacists saying to me that they find CCTV in that space very useful, because if something goes wrong, that's their system of accountability. They can review that footage and say, no, actually, I did everything right here. So there's pros and cons to everything. Yeah.
I mean, often the medication is dispensed outside of the medication room, which could be an area where there is surveillance, because in my last experience of being in an acute unit, that area where I took the pills was really the lounge area, or a sort of a open plan part of the lounge, you know.
Yeah, so that's correct, and often people will come and bring medication to patients for people to take, and that's exactly why I think that having CCTV cameras breaches the Mental Health Act, because that's a clear example of a treatment, and if that's been captured on CCTV, like we know it potentially is in Whanganui inpatient unit, and also the Lakes District in Nelson Marlborough, I think, as well. So those inpatient units are clearly breaching the mental health patient rights.